Happy Friday. I am back from Benchmark Week 2024 in Los Angeles. I spent 2 days and one night there, and I just made a quick video here of Simon Moore's coming up and wanted to just share that with you. The vibe there was generally kind of optimistic following the election, where there's been a lot of uncertainty. So this conference, very well timed as we were at the conference. Donald Trump announced a whole bunch of appointments to his cabinet, including Elon Musk becoming part of the Department of Government Efficiencies.
Okay, we're here at Benchmark Week in Los Angeles with the great Simon Moores. We interviewed you about exactly a year ago with a great investment from Spectrum Equity. Last year you had Arnold Schwarzenegger, which was impressive, but the conversation today that I just listened to with JB Straubel was like awesome. So just 1 year after this investment, the market's not been great overall. We had an election. Share with us your thoughts.
Well, has everything changed, or is everything kind of back to the future? I think there's a lot of guesswork when the Trump administration turned all of America red, really, in a resounding election win. And I presented on the stage today, actually, where did these IRA investments go? And overwhelmingly, depending on, pretty much if you look at every section of the supply chain, they all went into Republican states. So Donald Trump will oversee a great US battery boom with up to 37 gigafactories coming online in the next 4 years at various stages. With every gigafactory is up to 4,000 jobs. There's up to 50,000 jobs in the ecosystem directly surrounding it. And I think that the big missing link at the moment is obviously building more critical mineral supply. They're building that midstream, refining cathodes and anodes. And that's kind of where the missing link is. And certainly that's what we talked about on stage today.
Your influence in the industry was, I guess, started under the Trump administration. It told everyone, we were a bystander. And here I heard JB Straubel talking about the IRA as the laws were written, and he said he influenced how the language of the laws were written. But the implementation changed things, right? And he said follow the incentives, and the incentives went too far from on the EV side and the battery side. And they made exceptions, on the midstream, to friendly countries. But I felt, it sounded like he said there are ways to kind of rectify that under Trump. And you were mentioning to me when I first saw you that, now that you've had this big investment for Spectrum, you kind of you've grown enormously, over the past year. But, your role might be, back to what it was, on the political side. So what do you think you could influence, and what do you think over the next year? Obviously, David Straubel will have Elon Musk's here. Elon Musk has Donald Trump's here, but who's what kind of data are they using? Your data, and what kind of influence do you think you might have in shaping policy of the Trump administration?
It's hard to predict kind of the future influence we'll have. I mean, just make sure you're in the room, you're in the conversations. We've always done that. Certainly, I personally did a lot of that at the start of Benchmark as the rest of the team kind of built up the supply chain, the contacts, and the data on lithium and critical minerals and electric vehicles. But I always told the story to senators, to the White House, to government departments. And I think the last sort of couple of years, the story, because the IRA got launched, the story was almost sold. And so there wasn't much of a story to tell except for the need for data that we provide. Now, with a change in administration, the story needs to be told again. And it's a movement really that started with the Trump administration, Critical Minerals Executive Order 2017. First time ever really in detail that the government talked and put forward some legislation, or at least the beginnings of legislation on critical minerals. That flipped into the American Jobs Act, Biden, that turned into the IRA, and now we're kind of back to the future. And so my job now is to make sure I'm there to tell the story to whoever in the Republican Party in Washington, D.C., and on a state level, which is something I want to do more of. That's what I see my job as.
China, as I see it, obviously has subsidized this industry, has had long-term vision for this, but a major reason for their success is the vertical integration, closed loop across the supply chain.
Yeah.
So, and we obviously, Tesla is building cathode, it's building hydroxide,
Yeah.
it has a 4680, and David Straubel is building cathode, but we need a lot more of that. But do you think, Trump has said he'd welcome, CATL and BYD. Do you think like Ganfeng and maybe some cathode makers come here, and will you advocate for that? And do you think, we could be successful as a means to just copy and replicate? Like EVs are better, they're cheaper, they're not, it's better, faster, they're not yet cheaper.
Yeah.
But that integrated supply chain will make it cheaper. But do you think, will you advocate for that? And do you think it's likely we could see Chinese investment across the supply chain in the U.S.?
I think it's very likely. I mean, I said it in I don't know, it was whether our conversation or a podcast a year ago, that I think that the next big thing we don't talk about is major Chinese investment in the US, in the right areas, the areas where the US either doesn't have the skills or the capacity or the willing, certainly on a size level, to fill those gaps in, whether it's lithium refining, whether it's a cathode anode making precursor. And for me, Donald Trump began the China versus the USA story, and what a win it would be for him to say, we've got China to invest and create American jobs in America using Chinese money. And I think that the right Chinese companies have led this lithium-ion build-out since day one. It was always Tesla, and it was always Chinese companies. So I think eventually a gigafactory could be, or the supply chain for these gigafactories could be the olive branch